3 little kids were tied up inside a moving car. Then Hell's Angel refused to let it drive away. The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30, same as it did every morning, and Tank Morrison's hand found it in the dark without him even opening his eyes. 20 years of the same habit did that to a man. He lay there for a second, listening to the quiet. Just the hum of the old refrigerator downstairs in the shop, and somewhere outside, a rooster that belonged to his neighbor and never seemed to know what time it actually was. He sat up slow. His back cracked in 3 places, which it always did now, a reminder that 45 wasn't 25 anymore. The apartment above the shop wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, a couch that had seen better decades. But it was his. Paid for? No debts hanging over it. And that meant something to a man who once owned nothing at all. He shuffled to the kitchen and started the coffee maker, the same drip machine he'd had since his 30s. While it gurgled and hissed, he pulled on a flannel shirt and looked out the window above the sink. Down below, his motorcycle shop sat quiet, the sign still dark, hours from opening. Beyond it, Route 9 stretched out empty in the gray morning light, waiting for the world to wake up. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Coffee in hand, he walked down the back stairs to check on his bike, an old habit that had nothing to do with necessity and everything to do with comfort. The Harley sat in its usual spot, chrome catching what little light came through the shop windows. He ran a hand along the seat, checked the oil like he did most mornings, not because it needed it, but because the ritual settled something in him. Machines made sense. Machines you could fix. People were harder. Back upstairs, he sat at his small kitchen table and pulled out his wallet, worn soft at the corners from 30 years of being carried. Inside, tucked behind his license, was a photograph gone yellow at the edges. 2 kids, a boy of about 9 and a girl maybe 6, standing in front of a house that didn't exist anymore. Tank and his little sister, Carol, before everything fell apart. He looked at that photo most mornings. Didn't always mean to, but his fingers found it anyway. His parents had died when he was 9, a car accident on a rainy night that took them both in an instant. What came after was worse in its own quiet way. The state split him and Carol up within a month, sent them to different foster homes 2 counties apart, and promised it was temporary. It never was. Tank spent the next 9 years bouncing between families who never quite wanted him, and he never saw Carol again after he turned 18 and aged out of the system. Last he heard she'd changed her name, moved out west somewhere. He didn't blame her. That wound never healed all the way. It just scarred over, the way a bad break sets, crooked if nobody sets it right. Tank folded it into himself decades ago, tucked it under leather and quiet strength, and built a life anyway. He had the shop now. He had his chapter, men who respected him not because he was loud or wild, but because he showed up, kept his word, fixed what was broken and never asked for credit. Big Sal called him the steadiest man in the club, and Tank supposed that was true. Steady was what happened to a man who'd learned young that nothing was guaranteed. He put the photo back in his wallet and finished his coffee. Today was simple. A supplier 2 towns over had a shipment of parts waiting, brake lines and gaskets he needed for 3 different jobs sitting in his garage. Nothing complicated. Just a ride out on 9, load up the truck, maybe stop for gas and coffee along the way. He liked days like this. Simple, predictable, nothing that asked more of him than what he already knew how to give. He grabbed his jacket off the hook by the door, keys jingling in his pocket, and headed back down to the shop. The morning air had a bite to it when he stepped outside. cool enough to fog his breath. He threw a leg over the bike, settled into the seat that fit him like an old glove, and kicked the engine to life. It roared awake beneath him, steady and familiar. Tank pulled out of the gravel lot and onto Route 9, the highway stretching long and empty ahead of him under a sky just beginning to turn gold at the edges. The gas station appeared on his right about 20 minutes out, an old Sinclair place with a green dinosaur sign faded from years of sun. Tank had been stopping here for maybe 15 years, ever since the shop first opened. It wasn't much to look at. 2 pumps, a cracked parking lot, a squat little building with a bell over the door that jingled crooked. But the coffee was decent, and Marge, who ran the register, had a way of making a man feel like he mattered, even at 6 in the morning. He pulled his Harley in beside the pumps and cut the engine. The quiet that followed always surprised him a little, the way the world rushed back in once the bike went silent. Birds somewhere, a truck passing on the highway, and the low rumble of another engine idling nearby. Tank glanced over as he swung his leg off the seat. A sedan sat at the pump across from him. A Honda, maybe 10 years old. Mud streaked up the sides like it had been driven hard down some back road recently. The windows were fogged, breath or heat working against the cold morning air, and the engine kept running even though nobody seemed to be pumping gas. He didn't think much of it. People let their cars idle all the time, especially in weather like this, trying to keep warm. He pulled his jacket tighter and walked toward the station door, the bell jingling as he pushed inside. "Morning, Marge." Marge looked up from behind the counter, a cigarette she wasn't allowed to smoke inside tucked behind her ear like always. She was maybe 60, hair permed too tight, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She'd been running this station since before Tank's shop existed. "Tank Morrison, right on schedule." She said it the way she always did, like his routine amused her. "Regular coffee?" "You know it." She turned to the pot behind her, poured it into a paper cup without needing to ask how he took it. Black, always black. She set it on the counter and rang up the $2 it cost. "Slow morning?" Tank asked, pulling bills from his wallet. "Slow as they come. Had one fella come through about 10 minutes ago, though." Marge nodded her head toward the window, toward the lot outside. "That sedan out there. Fella's been sitting at that pump the whole time, hasn't even come in to pay, just sitting there with the engine running." Tank glanced out the window. From here he could see the back of the Honda, exhaust curling up into the cold air. Maybe he's waiting on somebody. Maybe. Marge didn't sound convinced. She handed him his change, counting it into his palm slow, the way she always did, like the counting itself was part of the conversation. "He come in a minute ago, actually. Bought a pack of gum, hand shaking the whole time. Wouldn't look at me straight on. Kept glancing back out at his car like he was worried it might drive off without him." She shook her head. "Twitchy. That's the word for it. Twitchy." "People get like that," Tank said. "Bad night, maybe. Long drive." "Maybe," Marge said again, though her tone said she'd seen enough tired travelers over the years to know the difference between exhausted and something else. "Just struck me odd is all. You want anything else, hon?" "This'll do it." Tank lifted the coffee in a small salute. "Have a good one, Marge." "You too, Tank. Ride safe." The bell jingled again as he pushed the door open and stepped back out into the cold morning air. He took a sip of the coffee, felt the heat of it cut through the chill, and started walking back toward his bike parked at the pump. The gravel crunched under his boots. Somewhere off in the distance, a bird called out, and the highway hummed with the occasional early car passing by. He glanced toward the sedan out of habit more than anything, the same way a man's eyes drift toward anything sitting nearby. The engine was still idling, exhaust still curling up. The windows were fogged with condensation, thick enough that he almost looked away. Almost? But something moved behind the glass. A small shift, a shape shifting in the back seat. Tank's eyes caught on it, and he slowed his steps, squinting through the fog on the window. Through the haze, he saw them. 3 small faces. Kids. And their wrists tied together with rope resting in their laps. Eyes wide, staring back at him, frozen with fear. Tank stopped walking entirely, his boots rooted to the gravel, the coffee cup forgotten in his hand. For a long moment, Tank couldn't move. His mind flashed back, unbidden, to a memory buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it was there. A social worker's hand on his shoulder. His little sister crying in the back of a different car, being driven away to a different house. He'd been 9 years old. He hadn't been able to do anything then. He wasn't 9 years old anymore. Tank set his coffee down slowly on the seat of his Harley, his movements careful, deliberate. He didn't want to spook whoever was in that car. He didn't want to spook the kids either. 3 of them, he'd counted. A little one, maybe 5, with a round face streaked with tears. A boy in the middle, maybe 8, staring at Tank like he didn't know if he should be scared or hopeful. And an older girl, maybe 11, her jaw set tight, her eyes sharp and watching, the way a kid watches when she's had to grow up faster than she should have. Tank walked toward the sedan, slow and steady, the way he'd approach a spooked horse or a frightened animal. He kept his hands loose at his sides, open, nothing threatening about them. He reached the driver's window and knocked, gentle, 2 soft raps against the glass. "Hey there," he said, keeping his voice low and even. "You mind rolling this down for me?" The driver flinched like he'd been struck. He was young, maybe late 20s, with greasy dark hair sticking up in patches and eyes rimmed red like he hadn't slept in days. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white. He didn't look over. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, out the windshield like Tank wasn't even there. "Sir," Tank said again, tapping the glass once more. "I just want to talk, that's all." Nothing. The young man's jaw worked, his throat bobbing like he was swallowing down something big. His hands trembled on the wheel. Tank glanced past him, into the back seat. The little one's chin quivered. The middle boy shrank back against the seat. The girl kept staring, and something about the way she looked at Tank made his chest tighten. It was the look of a kid trying to send a message with just her eyes, because she couldn't say the words out loud. "Hey," Tank said again, softer now, angling his words toward the back window as much as the driver. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt anybody." That was when the gear shift clunked. Tank heard it before he saw it, the distinct sound of a transmission dropping into reverse. The engine revved, a high, panicked whine, and the tires jerked backward half a foot before Tank's brain even caught up with what was happening. "Wait," Tank said, stepping back on instinct. The young man still wouldn't look at him. His hands shook harder on the wheel, and his mouth moved, mumbling something under his breath that Tank couldn't hear through the glass. Words like he was trying to talk himself into something. Words like a man drowning, arguing with the water. The car jerked backward another foot, tires crunching over gravel, and Tank realized in that instant that this man meant to drive away. Right now, with 3 kids tied up in the back seat. Something in Tank went very still and very clear, the way it used to back in his younger years when trouble found him and there wasn't time to think, only time to act. He moved. 2 long strides put him directly behind the car, square in its path, his boots planted wide on the cracked pavement. The sedan's reverse lights glared red against the morning gray, and the engine screamed louder as the driver pressed the gas. panic taking over whatever was left of his good sense. "Hey!" the driver shouted, finally looking at Tank through the windshield, eyes wild now, fear turning into something sharper. "Move! Get out of the way, man, I swear to God, move!" Tank didn't move. He didn't even blink. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, thumb finding the numbers without needing to look, keeping his eyes locked on the young man's through the glass the whole time. 911, Tank said out loud, more to himself than anyone, as the phone began to ring. "What's your emergency?" The driver revved the engine again, the whole car shuddering with the force of it, tires spinning uselessly against the gravel as he screamed something through the windshield that Tank couldn't quite make out, words tangled up with terror and desperation both. "Ma'am, I've got a vehicle here at the Route 9 station, off Millers Creek Road," Tank said into the phone, his voice flat and calm, the way he'd talk to a man bleeding out from a bad accident. No panic in it. No wasted words. 3 kids in the back seat, hands tied. Driver's trying to take off. I need units here now. Sir, can you confirm your location and stay on the line? Officers are being dispatched. The operator's voice was crisp, professional. I'm not going anywhere, Tank said. He lowered the phone slightly, but kept it live, kept the line open, and turned his full attention back to the man behind the wheel. Danny, though Tank didn't know his name yet, was breathing hard, his chest heaving under a thin gray hoodie gone dark with sweat under the arms. His eyes darted between Tank and the rearview mirror, between the road ahead and whatever was chasing him in his own mind. Listen to me, Tank said, loud enough to carry through the glass, but steady, no edge to it. Nobody's driving away, you hear me? This car isn't going anywhere. The man's mouth twisted, something between a sob and a snarl. You don't understand, he said, his voice cracking. You don't know what they'll do. They'll split them up. They'll take them, and I'll never... He stopped, choking on the rest of it, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Tank didn't answer that, not yet. There'd be time for that later. He sensed it, some instinct telling him this wasn't a monster behind the wheel, just a man drowning in fear. But right now, the only thing that mattered was the 3 kids in the back seat, and making sure they didn't get hurt in whatever happened next. He shifted his gaze to the window behind Danny, to the 3 faces pressed there, watching him with a mixture of terror and something that looked almost like hope. Tank kept his hands loose, non-threatening, held slightly out from his body, and he spoke to them now, pitching his voice low and warm, the same voice he might use gentling a spooked colt. Hey, he said. Hey, look at me. My name's Tank. I know that's a funny name. He almost smiled, just enough to soften his face, to take the edge off the leather vest and the gray beard and the size of him, which he knew could be a lot for anyone, let alone 3 scared kids. You're safe. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Police are coming and they're gonna help. You just hang on a little longer, okay? The littlest one, the boy with the round, wet face, stared at Tank like he was trying to decide if the words were true. The girl, the oldest, never took her eyes off him either, but there was something calculating in her stare now, something that had shifted from raw fear to careful assessment. Tank held her gaze and gave the smallest nod, the kind of nod that said, I mean it. I'm not lying to you. You're doing good, Tank said, mostly to the girl now, sensing she was the one holding the other 2 together. Real good. Just a little longer. The engine revved again, sharper this time, more desperate, and the whole car shuddered under Danny's foot, mashing the gas uselessly against the transmission still locked in place. Tank's boots stayed planted. He didn't so much as shift his weight. Sir, the operator's voice crackled from the phone still in his hand. Officers are 2 minutes out. Tank exhaled, slow, and looked back at Danny. 2 minutes, he said, loud enough for the man to hear through the glass. You can sit here and wait it out, or you can keep trying to run me over. Either way, I ain't moving. Far off, faint but growing, a siren wailed, then another, layering over each other, climbing in pitch as they drew closer down the county road. Danny's head snapped toward the sound, and something desperate flickered across his face, some last cornered animal instinct clawing up through the panic. His hand shot to the gear shift. The tires spun, gravel spraying, and the car lurched backward in one final screeching burst of speed, the engine screaming as Danny stomped the gas to the floor, aiming the back bumper straight at the space where Tank stood. Tank didn't move. The car's momentum carried it backward, tires shrieking against the pavement in protest, and it screeched to a stop, the bumper trembling inches from Tank's legs, so close he felt the heat of the engine through his jeans. The first patrol car swung into the station lot, lights strobing red and blue across the gray morning, tires crunching to a hard stop just feet away. 2 officers were out of the car before it had fully stopped rolling, hands on their holsters, shouting commands that blurred together in the cold morning air. "Driver! Hands where I can see them! Now!" Danny's hands flew up off the wheel like the words had burned him. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. The moment the door was wrenched open, he seemed to fold in on himself. All that frantic energy that had kept him gripping the wheel and stomping the gas draining out of him at once. The officer pulled him from the car, and Danny's knees hit the pavement hard, gravel biting into his skin through his thin jeans. He didn't seem to notice. His whole body was shaking now, great heaving sobs tearing out of him, the kind that come from somewhere so deep a person can't hold them back even if they wanted to. "Please," Danny gasped, the word broken in half. "Please, I didn't hurt them. I would never hurt them. I didn't know what else to do." The officer kept a firm grip on his arm, guiding him further from the car, though his voice had already lost some of its hard edge. Something in Danny's collapse had shifted the air around them. "Sir, I need you to stay calm and stay down for me," the officer said. "Just breathe." Danny nodded, gulping air, tears streaming down into his patchy beard. "They're my sister's kids," he choked out. "My sister, Rachel. She died 2 weeks ago. Her heart just stopped," they said, in her sleep. "And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to call. And everybody kept saying if the state took them, they'd split them up, put them in different homes. And I couldn't. I couldn't let that happen. They're all I got left of her." His voice cracked apart completely then, dissolving into sobs that shook his whole body. And the officer holding him went quiet, letting the words spill out because there was nothing else to do with a man breaking that hard. Tank stood back, watching it happen, feeling something twist hard in his own chest. He recognized the shape of that fear. He'd carried a version of it his whole life, buried under 40 years of silence, but he recognized it all the same. A second officer, a woman with her hair pulled back tight, moved toward the back door of the car, and Tank's attention snapped to the children before he even realized he'd moved closer himself. "Hey there," the woman said gently, crouching down so she was eye level with the window. "I'm gonna get you out of here, okay? You're safe now." She opened the door slow and careful, the way you'd open something fragile, and reached in first for the oldest girl, the one who'd been staring at Tank with that sharp, careful look. "Let's get these off you," the officer said, pulling a small pocket knife to cut through the rope binding the girl's wrists. The rope fell away, and the girl rubbed at the red marks left behind, wincing, but she didn't cry. She just watched, still and quiet, her eyes flicking between the officer, her uncle sobbing on the ground, and Tank standing a few feet off. The middle child, the boy, broke first, The second the rope came free from his wrists, he let out a wail, high and raw, the kind of cry that had probably been building the whole ride, held back out of fear, and now it came pouring out of him all at once. The officer pulled him gently from the car, and he clung to her, burying his face against her shoulder. Then came the littlest one. The officer reached for him, cutting the rope loose with careful hands, murmuring soft words Tank couldn't quite hear from where he stood. The boy, no older than 5, blinked up at her with wide, wet eyes, his lower lip trembling. The officer reached out her arms to lift him from the seat. But the boy didn't reach for her. He reached past her, small arms stretching out, fingers spread straight toward Tank. Tank felt something crack open in his chest at the sight of it, that tiny hand hanging in the air, reaching for him instead of the badge, instead of the uniform, instead of anyone else standing there. He didn't think. He just stepped forward and closed the distance, kneeling down so the boy's hand found his, small fingers wrapping around one of his own thick ones. The girl's eyes stayed locked on Tank the whole time, cautious, assessing. But something in them had softened, just slightly, watching her little brother's hand disappear into Tank's. Someone brought blankets first. A young officer draped them over the kids' shoulders, thin gray things that smelled like the trunk of a squad car, but the children pulled them tight anyway, like the fabric alone could hold them together. Another officer passed out bottles of water, the plastic crinkling loud in the quiet morning air. Ellie took her bottle, but didn't drink. She held it in both hands, watching everything, the way a person watches a room they don't trust yet. Jaden drank his down in one long pull, then hiccuped, still sniffling from the crying jag that had left his cheeks blotchy and red. Mikey didn't let go of Tank's hand long enough to hold his own water bottle, so Tank held it for him, tipping it up so the boy could drink without letting go. Nobody told Tank to leave. He wasn't sure anyone had noticed him enough to think about it. He was just a big man in a leather vest crouched on the pavement, and for now, that seemed to be exactly where he was supposed to be. A few yards away, Danny sat on the curb, with his wrists free, but his head hanging low between his knees, a female officer standing over him with a small notepad, asking questions in a low, steady voice. Tank couldn't hear all of it, but he caught pieces. "Your sister's name?" "Rachel," Danny said, voice raw and stripped down. "Rachel Reyes." "And she passed how long ago?" 2 weeks. Aneurysm, in her sleep. Nobody knew. She was fine. She was just fine." And then she wasn't. The officer nodded slow, writing it down, and stepped away a few feet to make a call, phone pressed to her ear. Tank watched her pace back and forth along the edge of the parking lot, nodding at whatever the person on the other end was saying. After a few minutes, she came back, crouching slightly so she was eye level with Danny. "Family Services confirmed it," she said quietly. "Rachel Reyes, sudden death, 2 weeks ago. You were listed as emergency contact for the children." Danny nodded, tears sliding fresh down his face. "I didn't know what else to do. I called the number they gave me, this hotline thing, and the woman on the phone said, real casual like, that siblings get split up all the time, that there weren't enough homes that'd take 3 kids together. I couldn't let that happen. Not after everything." "What happened at the rest stop?" the officer asked, gentler now. "Why the rope?" Danny's shoulders curled in tighter. "Ellie tried to run," he said. "About an hour back. We stopped so the little ones could use the bathroom, and she took off, ran for the building, screaming for somebody to help her. I caught her before she got far, but I panicked. I thought if I lost them right there at some rest stop, that'd be it. They'd take them and I'd never see any of them again." His voice cracked. I didn't want to hurt them. I swear to God I didn't want to scare them like that. I just didn't know what else to do to keep us together." The officer studied him a long moment, and Tank saw something shift in her face, the hard edges softening into something closer to pity. She didn't say anything else, just stood and walked off to confer with her partner, leaving Danny hunched on the curb, spent and hollow. Tank stayed where he was, Mikey's hand still wrapped around his finger, Ellie's eyes still flicking toward him every so often like she was trying to decide something. The morning sun had climbed higher now, burning off the last of the gas station's shadow, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like maybe the worst of it was over. That was when a white sedan pulled into the lot, unmarked, practical, the kind of car that never seemed to belong to anybody in particular. A woman stepped out, dressed sharp in a blazer despite the early hour, a leather folder tucked under one arm. She walked with the brisk, tired efficiency of someone who did this every day, and she introduced herself to the nearest officer as Ms. Patterson, County Family Services. She crouched beside the children first, spoke a few soft words Tank couldn't hear, then stood and moved toward Danny, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Reyes," she said, "given the circumstances here today, the restraints, and your attempt to evade police, I'm going to need to place the children into emergency protective custody." Danny's head snapped up. "What? No, please, you don't understand, I wasn't—" "They'll be placed in emergency foster care," Ms. Patterson continued, steady, practiced, though something in her eyes flickered with reluctance. "Pending a custody hearing. Given the number of children and current placement availability, they will likely be separated among different homes for now." Ms. Patterson knelt down again, her voice soft, the kind of soft that came from years of practice, from saying hard things to small people more times than she probably wanted to count. "Okay, sweethearts," she said. "I need you to come with me now. I know it's scary, but I'm going to make sure you're taken care of." She reached a hand toward Ellie first, since Ellie was the oldest, the one who might understand. But Ellie didn't move. She stood rooted to the pavement, one arm slung protectively around Jaden's shoulders, and looked at the woman like she was something to be measured and weighed and found wanting. "Together?" Ellie asked. Her voice was small but sharp, cutting straight through the noise of the parking lot. "Are we staying together?" Ms. Patterson's mouth pressed into a thin line. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens as soon as possible. But right now this morning, there might not be a placement that can take all three of you at once." "No," Ellie said. "Ellie, no." She said it louder this time, and Jaden started crying again. That thin, hiccuping cry of a kid who's cried too much already and doesn't have much left in the tank. He grabbed a fistful of Ellie's shirt with one hand and reached for Tank with the other, small fingers curling into the leather of his vest, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Mikey, still holding on to Tank's hand, wrapped his other arm around Tank's leg and squeezed like he meant to become part of him, to fuse himself to this stranger in leather rather than be peeled away toward the white sedan waiting at the edge of the lot. "Come on now," Ms. Patterson said, gentler, crouching lower. "I know this is scary. I know you don't know me, but I promise I'm here to help." Mikey shook his head hard, his face buried now in the side of Tank's jeans. "Don't want to go," he mumbled, muffled. "Want to stay with him." The officer who'd been questioning Danny glanced over at Tank, a little wary, like she was reconsidering whether the big biker crouched on the pavement was part of the problem or not. But nobody moved to pull the kids away just yet. There was something in the air, something nobody quite wanted to break. Tank felt it too. That pull, that responsibility settling onto his shoulders like a weight he hadn't asked for but couldn't set down either. He looked down at Mikey's small, dark head pressed against his leg, then over at Ellie, whose eyes were shining now, angry and scared, and trying so hard not to cry in front of strangers. Jaden hiccuped again, wiping his nose on his sleeve, watching Tank the way a kid watches the one steady thing in a room full of shaking. Tank lowered himself down slowly, knees cracking against the pavement, until he was eye level with all three of them. Up close, he could see every detail of their exhaustion. The dirt smudged on Jaden's cheek, the rope burn still faintly pink on Ellie's wrists, the way Mikey's eyes were rimmed red and swollen from crying. "Hey," Tank said, keeping his voice low, steady, the same voice he used on spooked animals and frightened strangers. "Look at me." Ellie looked. Jaden looked. Even Mikey lifted his face from Tank's leg, just enough to peek up through wet lashes. "I'm not going anywhere," Tank said. "You hear me? I'm right here. I'm not leaving this parking lot until I know you're okay. All three of you." Mikey's grip loosened just slightly, though he didn't let go entirely. Ellie studied Tank's face like she was searching for the lie in it, the catch, the trick grown-ups usually had waiting. She didn't find one. Something in her shoulders eased, just barely, just enough. Tank held that look a moment longer, then turned his head toward Ms. Patterson, who stood watching the whole exchange with an expression caught somewhere between professional caution and something softer underneath. "Ma'am," Tank said, "you got a card? Something with your number on it?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the question, but she reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a small white card, offering it to him without a word. Tank took it carefully, like it was something fragile, and tucked it into his vest pocket, right against his chest. The morning light came in slow through the shop windows, cutting long yellow bars across the concrete floor. Tank sat on his stool by the workbench, a wrench in his hand, staring at a carburetor he was supposed to be cleaning. He'd been staring at it for 20 minutes. He hadn't touched it once. The shop smelled like it always did, oil and metal and old coffee, and normally that smell settled him. Normally he could lose himself in the small, careful work of taking something broken and making it run right again. That was the whole reason he liked this job. Engines didn't lie to you. They didn't have sad eyes. You could fix an engine. He kept seeing Mikey's face. The way the kid's fingers had dug into his jeans like he was afraid the ground itself might open up and swallow him if he let go. He kept hearing Ellie's voice, sharp as a blade, asking if they'd stay together, already knowing the answer might be no. He kept picturing the rope burn on her wrists, faint and pink, the kind of mark that fades from skin a lot faster than it fades from memory. Tank set the wrench down. It clattered against the bench louder than he meant it to. He thought about his own hands, 40 years ago, small and shaking, gripping the strap of a duffel bag, while a stranger in a gray coat told him his little brother and sister were going somewhere else. Different somewhere. He'd been 9. He remembered thinking, if I just hold on tight enough, they won't be able to take them. He'd been wrong. The phone on the wall rang, sharp and sudden, and Tank nearly knocked his coffee over reaching for it. Morrison's repair. "Mr. Morrison?" The voice was familiar. Careful. "This is Ms. Patterson, from yesterday." Tank straightened up on the stool, gripping the receiver tighter than it needed. Yeah, I remember. "I wanted to let you know where things stand," she said. "Danny Reyes is still in custody. There's a bail hearing scheduled, but for now he's being held while the charges get sorted out. As for the children—" She paused, and Tank heard papers shuffling on her end, the sound of a woman trying to find the gentlest way to say something hard. "They've been placed together for now in a temporary group shelter here in the county. It's not permanent. It's just until we figure out next steps." "Together," Tank said. "All three of them." "For now," she said again, like she didn't want him getting his hopes built too high on a word that could crumble any day. "It's not a foster placement. It's more like emergency housing. But at least they're not separated. Not yet." Tank closed his eyes. Relief and dread mixed together in his chest, sour and sweet at the same time. "That's good," he said. "That's something." "I thought you'd want to know," she said. "You seemed invested." Tank almost laughed at that word. Invested. Like this was a business deal. Like it wasn't a 5-year-old's fingers digging into his leg like a drowning kid grabbing driftwood. "Yeah," he said instead. "I am." They talked another minute, Ms. Patterson giving him the address of the shelter, though she was careful to say visiting wasn't guaranteed, that he wasn't family, that the rules around who could see the kids were strict for a reason. Tank wrote the address down anyway on the back of a receipt, his handwriting rough and slanted, hand still not quite steady. After he hung up, he sat there a long moment, staring at the carburetor again, at the wrench lying where he'd dropped it. Then he stood up. He walked to the front of the shop and flipped the sign in the window from open to closed, even though it wasn't even noon yet, even though old man Hendricks was supposed to bring his truck in that afternoon for a brake job. Tank pulled his keys from his pocket, grabbed his jacket off the hook by the door, and killed the lights. He didn't know if they'd let him in. He didn't know what he'd even say if they did. Maybe he'd just stand in a hallway somewhere and they'd tell him to leave. Maybe the kids wouldn't even be allowed to see him. Some stranger in leather who didn't have a single legal right to walk through that door. But he had to know. He had to see their faces, and know, with his own eyes, that they were okay. Tank swung his leg over his bike, kicked the engine to life, and pulled out of the lot, the address to the county shelter folded up tight in his vest pocket, right where he'd tucked Miss Patterson's card the night before. The county shelter was a low brick building with a chain-link fence around a small yard, the kind of place that tried to look friendly and mostly just looked tired. Tank parked his bike at the far end of the lot, away from the other cars, out of habit more than anything. He sat there a minute with his hands still on the grips, looking at the front doors. Then he went in. The woman at the front desk looked up at him, and her face did the thing faces did when Tank walked into a room. A little flicker of alarm, quickly covered up. He was used to it. Big man, leather vest, patches on his shoulders, gray in his beard. He didn't blame her. "Can I help you?" she asked, polite but wary. "My name's Tank Morrison." He cleared his throat. "I'm here about the Reyes kids. Ellie, Jaden, and Mikey. I was the one at the gas station yesterday. The one who called it in." The woman's eyebrows went up. "You're the biker," she said, and then looked embarrassed for saying it that way. "I am," Tank said simply. "I'll need to check with my supervisor. Family visits have to be cleared, and you're not—" She trailed off, glancing at a clipboard like it might tell her what to say. "I'm not family," Tank finished for her. "I know. I just need to see them. I won't stay long." She picked up a phone and murmured into it, and a few minutes later, a woman came out from a back hallway, tall, with reading glasses pushed up into short gray hair and a folder tucked under her arm. She looked at Tank the way you'd look at a big dog you weren't sure about yet. "Mr. Morrison," she said. "I'm Diane Cho. I supervise this facility. Ms. Patterson called ahead about you." Tank straightened. "She did?" "She said you played a significant role in getting those children to safety, and that you've expressed a lot of concern for their well-being." Diane studied him another moment. "I want to be honest with you. We don't normally allow visits from anyone outside of family or approved caseworkers. But given the circumstances, and given what Ms. Patterson told me, I'm willing to allow a short, supervised visit. 15 minutes. I'll be in the room." "That's fine," Tank said quickly. "That's more than fine. Thank you." She led him down a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet, past a bulletin board covered in crayon drawings, past a window looking into a small playroom with a couple of battered board games stacked on a shelf. At the end of the hall, she opened a door into a plain room with a table, a few chairs, a box of tissues sitting in the middle like it was expecting to be needed. "Wait here," Diane said. "I'll bring them in." Tank stood by the table, not sitting, his hands hanging awkward at his sides. He heard footsteps down the hall, small ones, quick. The door opened. Mikey saw him first. The little boy's face broke open, pure and sudden, like sunlight coming out from behind a cloud, and he was moving before anyone could stop him, running straight across the room with his arms already reaching up. Tank dropped to one knee just in time, and Mikey crashed into him, small arms locking around his neck, face pressed into his shoulder. "You came," Mikey said, muffled into the leather of Tank's vest. You came. "Course I came, buddy," Tank said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Ellie stood in the doorway a second longer, watching, her arms crossed tight over her chest like armor. But something in her face softened when she saw Mikey's shoulders relax, when she saw the way he melted into Tank like a held breath finally let go. Jaden peeked out from behind her, and then both of them came forward too, not running like Mikey had, but coming close, standing near enough that Tank could reach out an arm and pull them in without even trying. Diane stood by the door, watching all of it, her clipboard forgotten at her side. "They haven't been like this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Not since they got here." Tank looked up at her over the kids' heads. "They've been quiet," Diane said. "Scared. Ellie won't let go of the boys, but she won't talk to any of us either. This is..." She shook her head slowly. "This is different." "They know me," Tank said simply. "That's all. They know I'm not going to let anything happen to them." Diane was quiet a moment, watching Mikey's small fingers still gripping Tank's vest, watching Ellie's shoulders loosen for the first time since she'd walked through the shelter doors. "Come back tomorrow," she said finally. "Same time. We'll set it up as a regular visit." Tank felt something in his chest unclench, just slightly. "I'll be here," he said. The clubhouse sat off a gravel road outside town, a converted warehouse with a gravel lot full of bikes lined up like soldiers. Yellow light spilled out from the windows, and Tank could hear laughter and the clink of bottles before he even cut his engine. He sat on his bike a minute in the dark, same as he'd sat outside the shelter that morning. Then he went in. The place smelled like beer and motor oil and old wood smoke. A dozen guys were scattered around, some at the pool table, some at the bar Big Sal had built himself out of scrap lumber 20 years back. Dutch was in his usual spot at the end of the bar, boots up on the rail, nursing a beer. He looked up when Tank walked in, and his face changed right away. "You look like hell," Dutch said. "What happened?" Tank didn't answer at first. He walked over, sat down heavy on the stool next to Dutch, and rubbed a hand down his face. "Sal around?" he asked. "Right here." Big Sal's voice came from behind the bar. He was a broad man, older than Tank, with a beard gone fully white and forearms like tree trunks. He set down the glass he'd been drying and leaned on the bar, studying Tank's face the way he studied everything, careful and slow. "You gonna tell us what's wrong? Or you gonna sit there looking like somebody died?" So Tank told them. He told them about the gas station, the fogged-up window, the kids' wrists tied with rope. He told them about stepping in front of the car, about the sirens, about the man who turned out to be no kidnapper at all, but a scared kid himself, barely out of his 20s, trying to keep his sister's children together after she died. He told them about the caseworker, about the shelter, about Mikey running across the room and crashing into him like he'd been waiting his whole short life for somebody to catch him. By the time he finished, the pool game had stopped. Every man in the room was listening. Nobody was laughing. Tank braced himself for what usually came when he talked too much about feelings in a room full of bikers. A joke, maybe. Since when do you go soft, Tank? Something to break the tension. Instead, Big Sal set down his rag and came around the bar. "Those kids got anybody?" he asked. "Family, I mean. Besides the uncle." "No," Tank said. "That's the whole problem. If the uncle doesn't get custody, they're gonna get split up. Different foster homes. Maybe for good." Sal's jaw tightened. He didn't say anything for a second, just stood there with his arms crossed, and Tank realized the old man was thinking, really thinking, the way he did before chapter votes that mattered. "What's the uncle's situation?" Dutch asked. "Legally, I mean. Is he in real trouble?" "Charged with something," Tank said. "Reckless endangerment, maybe more. I don't know all the details yet, but he's gonna need a lawyer, a good one. He doesn't have money for that." "So get him one," Sal said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Tank looked up at him. "Sal, that's not cheap." "I didn't ask if it was cheap." Sal's voice was flat, final, the voice he used when a decision was already made in his head. "I asked what he needs. We got a legal fund from the toy run last year. Ain't touched it. This is exactly what it's for." A murmur went around the room, low and steady, men nodding, a couple of them already pulling out their phones like they were ready to start making calls right then. Dutch set his beer down. "I know a lawyer," he said. "Rebecca Alvarez. Did some work for my nephew a couple years back when he got jammed up on a bad charge. She's sharp, doesn't take garbage clients, but she's got a heart on her too when the case is right." He looked at Tank, steady. This sounds like exactly the kind of case she'd want to hear about. Tank felt something loosen in his chest, the same slow unclenching he'd felt outside the shelter that morning. "You think she'd talk to me?" he asked. "I think," Dutch said, "you ought to call her tomorrow. Tonight if you can't sleep." Sal clapped a heavy hand on Tank's shoulder. "Whatever this family needs," he said. "Legal fees, moving help, somebody to stand up in court and say we know you and we trust you. Whatever it takes. This chapter's behind you." Around the room, the others were already nodding agreement, murmuring their support, a couple of them raising their bottles like it was a toast. The county jail sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building with narrow windows and a flagpole out front that never seemed to have a flag on it. Tank had never had a reason to visit before. He'd driven past it 1,000 times on his way to the shop, never once thinking about what happened inside those walls. Now he sat in the parking lot, same as he'd sat outside the clubhouse 2 nights back, working up the nerve to go in. The visiting room was small and smelled like bleach and old coffee. A guard led Tank to a row of plastic chairs facing a scratched-up window of thick glass. He sat down heavy, his leather vest creaking, and waited. When they brought Danny in, Tank almost didn't recognize him. The wild-eyed man from the gas station was gone. In his place was somebody smaller, somebody hollowed out. Danny's hair was greasy and flat against his head. His eyes were red-rimmed, ringed with dark circles like bruises. He shuffled to the chair on his side of the glass and sat down slow, like his whole body hurt. He picked up the phone on his side. Tank picked up his. For a second, neither of them said anything. "You're the guy," Danny said finally. His voice came out cracked and thin through the phone line. From the gas station, the one who stopped me. That's right. Danny's face crumpled. I'm sorry, he said, and the words came out fast, tumbling over each other like they'd been sitting behind his teeth for 2 days waiting to get out. I'm so sorry. I know what it looked like. I know what you thought. God, I scared them so bad. I scared my own sister's kids, and I'll never forgive myself for that. Never. Not as long as I live. Danny, I wasn't going to hurt them. His hands were shaking on the counter, the phone cord swinging slightly with the movement. I swear to you I wasn't going to hurt them. I just didn't know what else to do. Tank kept his voice low and even, the same voice he'd used on the kids that day at the pump. Tell me, he said. I want to hear it. So Danny told him. He told him about the phone call 2 weeks back, his sister Rachel's number on the screen at 2 a.m. Except it wasn't Rachel. It was a stranger's voice telling him there'd been an accident. He told him about standing in a hospital hallway, trying to figure out how to tell an 11-year-old her mother wasn't coming home. He told him about the days after, a blur of funeral arrangements and casseroles from neighbors, and a stack of paperwork he didn't understand. And somewhere in all of it, a woman at Rachel's church pulling him aside and telling him horror stories. Kids getting split up. Siblings who never saw each other again. Foster homes where nobody cared if you were somebody's brother or somebody's sister, just another kid, another number. She told me it happens all the time, Danny said. She told me once the state gets involved, you don't got no say no more. And I believed her. God help me, I believed her. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. Rough, like he was angry at himself for crying. So when that caseworker started asking questions I didn't like, I panicked. I thought if I could just get somewhere, anywhere, we could start over as a family, just the 4 of us. They'd never have to know. And the rope, Tank said quietly. Danny's face broke apart completely then. He put the phone down for a second, pressed both hands over his eyes, and Tank waited because there wasn't anything to say that would make it hurt less. Ellie tried to run, Danny said when he picked the phone back up, his voice barely a whisper now. At the rest stop. She ran for the road, screaming, and I thought somebody was going to call the cops right then and take them from me forever. I panicked. I wasn't thinking straight. I just wanted to keep them together. That's all I ever wanted. Just the 3 of them, together, safe. I didn't want nothing else. I didn't want money. I didn't want easy. I just wanted them not to lose each other, too. Tank sat with that for a long moment, the phone heavy in his hand. Then, quiet, he said. I know what that's like. Danny looked up. I was 9, Tank said, when I got put in the system. Had 2 little brothers. They split us up first week. Different homes, different towns. He swallowed hard, the old ache rising up in his chest like it always did, dull and familiar. I never saw them again, not once, not to this day. Danny stared at him through the glass, and for the first time since Tank had walked in, neither of them said a word. Rebecca Alvarez's office sat above a dry cleaner on Main Street, up a narrow staircase with a wobbly handrail. The sign on the door was small and plain, just her name in black letters. Dutch had scrawled her number on a napkin 2 days back, tucked it into Tank's hand outside the clubhouse. She's good people, he'd said. Took my cousin's case when nobody else would touch it. Doesn't scare easy. Tank had called that same night. Now he sat across from her in a chair that was too small for him, his knees nearly touching the edge of her desk. The office was cramped, stacked with file folders and law books with cracked spines. But there was a plant on the windowsill that somebody clearly watered, and a photo of a golden retriever pinned to a corkboard behind her head. Rebecca herself was younger than Tank expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and her dark hair pulled back tight. She had a legal pad in front of her, already half filled with notes from what he'd told her on the phone. Walk me through it again, she said. From the beginning. Don't leave anything out, even the parts that don't seem important. So Tank did. He told her about the gas station, the fogged window, the rope. He told her about the sirens, the way Danny's hands had shook on the wheel. He told her about the caseworker showing up, the kids splitting apart in the parking lot, Mikey reaching for his hand instead of hers. He told her what Danny had said in the visiting room, about Rachel, about the woman from the church and her horror stories, about Ellie running for the road. Rebecca listened without interrupting, pen moving steady across the page. When he finished, she set the pen down and leaned back in her chair. "Okay," she said. "Here's where things stand. Danny's looking at charges for unlawful restraint. And depending on how the prosecutor wants to play it, possibly reckless endangerment. The fleeing adds another layer, though that's more likely to get folded into a lesser charge, given he never actually resisted once you had him stopped." She tapped her pen against the pad. "None of that's good, but none of it's hopeless either. What's it look like, realistically?" "Realistically, the restraint charge is the one that worries me most. Judges don't like seeing kids tied up, and I don't blame them. On paper, it looks bad, real bad." She held up a hand before Tank could argue. "But paper doesn't tell the whole story. What you just told me, that's the whole story. A man who lost his sister 2 weeks ago, drowning, scared out of his mind by bad information, making a terrible choice out of panic and love, not cruelty. That's a very different picture than a stranger snatching kids off the street. So there's a way through this. There's a path. It's not a straight one, and it's not guaranteed. But judges are human beings, and most of them can tell the difference between malice and desperation if somebody puts in the work to show them." She studied Tank for a second. "You clearly already believe in this family. Why?" Tank was quiet a moment. Then he told her about being 9 years old, about his brothers, about a lifetime spent wondering what happened to them. Rebecca's face changed while he talked, something in it softening. "That's exactly the kind of thing that needs to be in front of a judge," she said when he finished. "Not the legal argument, the human one." She pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her. "I'll take the case. Pro bono, don't worry about that part." Tank blinked. "Just like that?" "Just like that. Some cases you take for the fee. This isn't one of them." She capped her pen. "There's a custody hearing coming up for the kids too, isn't there?" "Week and a half out." "I want you to consider testifying, as a character witness. You were there, you saw it firsthand, you've seen Danny since, you know his intentions better than almost anybody in that courtroom is going to. That kind of testimony carries weight judges don't get from paperwork." Tank didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." The shelter was a squat, brick building on the edge of town, the kind of place with fluorescent lights that hummed too loud and couches that had seen too many families come and go. Tank hated it the first time he walked in, hated the smell of industrial cleaner and the way the walls were painted a cheerful yellow that fooled nobody. But he kept coming back. Every visiting day, sometimes twice a week when they let him, he showed up with his boots heavy on the tile floor and something small tucked under his arm. The first week, it was books. He didn't know much about what kids liked to read, so he'd stood in the children's section of the bookstore in town for near 20 minutes, feeling like a giant among the little shelves, before a woman working there took pity on him and helped him pick out a stack. A chapter book about a dog for Ellie, since the woman said girls her age liked stories with heart. A comic book full of jokes for Jaden. A picture book with bright pictures of trucks for Mikey. Ellie took her book like she was accepting something she didn't quite trust yet, turning it over in her hands, reading the back cover twice before she said a quiet thank you. Jaden tore into his without waiting, laughing out loud at a joke on the very first page, looking up at Tank like he wanted to share it but didn't have the words yet. Mikey just held his against his chest and leaned into Tank's side on the couch, not saying much of anything, which had become his way of saying everything. The second week, Tank brought drawing supplies. A fat pack of crayons, a stack of paper, colored pencils for Ellie, because she seemed like the type who wanted more control over her lines. Jayden drew motorcycles, wobbly and wild, wheels too big for the frames, and proudly held up every single one for Tank's approval. Tank praised every single one like it was a masterpiece. Ellie drew houses, always the same house, a square with a triangle roof and smoke curling from a chimney, 3 little windows lined up in a row. Tank never asked her about it. He figured she'd tell him when she was ready, if she ever was. He brought Jayden a soccer ball on the 3rd visit, and they kicked it back and forth in the small fenced yard behind the shelter while a caseworker watched from the window with her arms crossed. Not unkindly, just watching. Jayden ran like he was trying to outrun something, cheeks red, laughing in short bursts between breaths. Tank let him win every game they invented, even the ones with rules that changed halfway through. Mikey didn't ask for anything. He just wanted to be near. He'd climb up next to Tank on the couch and go quiet, thumb sometimes finding its way to his mouth, even though Danny said he'd stopped that habit a year ago. Tank would put an arm around him and let him stay there, saying nothing, because sometimes nothing was exactly what a 5-year-old needed. Tank learned things without being told. He learned Ellie didn't sleep much, dark circles sitting under her eyes like bruises. He learned Jayden flinched at loud voices, but never at loud engines, like the sound of a motorcycle was somehow safer to him than a shout. He learned Mikey woke up crying most nights, and the shelter staff had taken to leaving a night light on in his room, which was more kindness than Tank expected from a place like this. It was on the 4th visit, near the end of the 2nd week, that Ellie found him alone by the window, while Jayden showed Mikey how to stack a tower of blocks across the room. She had her arms wrapped around herself, the way she always stood when she was working up to saying something hard. "Do you think," she started, then stopped. Started again. "Do you think me and my brothers are going to get to stay together? Like, actually stay together, not just visits?" Tank crouched down so he was eye level with her, the way he always did when something mattered. "I can't promise you that," he said. "I won't lie to you, Ellie. Not ever. Nobody can promise you how a judge is going to rule." Her face started to fall. "But I can promise you this," he said. "I am going to do everything in my power, everything I have, to make sure that happens. I am not walking away from you 3. Not now, not ever." Ellie studied his face for a long moment, like she was deciding whether to believe him. Then, slowly, she nodded. Tank had cleared it with the shelter director a full week ahead of time. She'd raised her eyebrows so high they nearly touched her hairline when he explained who exactly he wanted to bring along. "Bikers," she'd said, like she was tasting the word. "Good men," Tank had answered. "Better than most folks you'll ever meet in suits." She'd agreed on the condition that everyone behave themselves and keep their language clean, and that Ms. Patterson would be present to observe. Tank had shaken her hand and told her she wouldn't regret it. Now, on a bright Saturday afternoon, 3 motorcycles rumbled into the shelter's gravel lot, engines growling low before cutting to silence. Big Sal stayed back that day, minding the shop, but Dutch had come, along with a mountain of a man named Preacher, so called because he used to read scripture at his grandmother's church as a boy, and never lost the habit of speaking like every word mattered. The kids pressed their faces to the window when they heard the engines. By the time Tank walked through the door with Dutch and Preacher behind him, Jayden was already bouncing on his toes. "Are those real Hell's Angels?" he asked, eyes wide. "Real as it gets," Tank said. Dutch grinned, all gold tooth and crinkled eyes, and crouched down to Jayden's level. He pulled a deck of cards from his vest pocket, worn soft at the corners from years of handling. "You ever seen a card disappear?" Dutch asked. Jayden shook his head, and Dutch fanned the deck out, had Jayden pick a card, memorize it, slide it back in. With a flick of his thick fingers, wrapped in rings shaped like skulls, the card vanished from the deck and turned up, tucked behind Jayden's own ear. Jayden shrieked with laughter and demanded he do it again and again, and Dutch obliged every time, patient as a man with all the time in the world. Preacher, meanwhile, had settled his huge frame onto the small shelter couch, which groaned under his weight, and pulled one of the books from the shelf Tank had stocked. Ellie's dog book. He held it up. "Mind if I read this one?" he asked her, and something about the gentleness in his voice, coming out of a man built like a refrigerator with a beard down to his chest, made Ellie's mouth twitch toward a smile. She nodded, and Preacher began to read. His voice boomed through the small room, deep and rich, but he softened it in the tender parts, made the dog's voice squeaky and silly, made the sad parts hush low so the children leaned in to hear. Mikey climbed up onto the couch beside him without being asked, resting his small head against Preacher's massive arm like it was the most natural place in the world to be. Preacher didn't stop reading. He just shifted his arm slightly to make room, like he'd been making room for small, scared children his whole life. Ms. Patterson stood near the doorway with her clipboard, and Tank watched her watching them. Her pen didn't move. She just stood there, taking it all in, her expression unreadable but her eyes soft in a way he hadn't seen from her before. By the end of the visit, Jayden had learned 2 card tricks well enough to fumble through them himself. Ellie had made Preacher promise to bring the sequel to the dog book next time, and Mikey had fallen half asleep against Preacher's side, thumb nowhere near his mouth. When it was time to go, Dutch ruffled Jayden's hair and told him to practice his shuffle, and Preacher shook Ellie's hand with a solemnness that made her sit up a little straighter, like she'd been treated like someone important for the first time in weeks. Outside, as Dutch and Preacher swung back onto their bikes, Ms. Patterson caught Tank's arm before he could follow. "Can I have a word?" she asked. Tank nodded, and they stepped a few feet away, out of earshot. "I've been doing this job 12 years, she said slowly, choosing her words with care. "I've seen a lot of arrangements that looked good on paper and fell apart, and I've seen some that looked like nothing at all turn into the best homes a kid could ask for." She glanced back toward the window, where the kids were still waving at the motorcycles pulling away. "I'm not saying anything official," she said, "but if this went in front of the right judge, with the right people vouching for it, I might be willing to say I've seen something here worth fighting for." Rebecca Alvarez's office smelled like coffee and old paper. She had a corner spot above a hardware store, 2 windows that let in slanted afternoon light, and a desk covered in files stacked so high they looked like they might topple with one wrong breath. Tank sat across from her in a chair too small for his frame, his big hands folded on his knees like a man in church. "Tell me about your brother and sister," Rebecca said. She had a legal pad in front of her, pen uncapped, but she wasn't writing yet. She was watching him. Tank looked at the window for a long moment. "Why does that matter for Danny's hearing?" "Because the judge needs to understand why you care so much," Rebecca said. "Not just that you do. Why? Judges hear 100 character witnesses say the same soft words. I need yours to land different." Tank rubbed a hand over his beard, the way he did when he was buying time. He hadn't talked about this in years. Not to his chapter brothers, not to anyone, but he owed it to those 3 kids to dig it up. "My mom and dad died in a car wreck when I was 9, he said. His voice came out steady, though something in his chest had gone tight. "I had a sister, Carrie. She was 6. A brother, Michael. He was 4. Rebecca's pen started moving now, slow and careful. "They split us up fast," Tank went on. Nobody meant to be cruel about it. There just weren't enough foster homes that wanted 3 kids at once. So they took Carrie to one family, Michael to another, and I went somewhere else. They told me it was temporary. Told me they'd try to get us back together once things settled. Did they? Tank shook his head. Never happened. I saw Carrie twice after that, at supervised visits, and then the family that took her moved out of state. I never saw Michael again after the day they split us up. I don't even know if he's alive. He swallowed hard. I spent 40 years wondering what happened to my own brother. 40 years, Rebecca. That's not something you get over. It's something you carry. Rebecca set her pen down. For a moment she didn't say anything at all, just let the weight of it sit in the room. That's what you tell the judge, she said finally, not the polished version. That version, right there. It'll sound like I'm talking about myself instead of Danny and the kids. No, Rebecca said. It'll sound like you know exactly what's at stake if this goes wrong. That's not the same thing. That's the whole reason your voice matters more than mine. They worked through the rest of the afternoon, Rebecca shaping his words into something a courtroom could hold, but never softening the truth of it. By the time Tank left her office, the sun had dropped low and orange over the rooftops, and his chest ached in a way it hadn't in years. Old wounds, reopened on purpose. That night, he drove to the county jail. Danny looked thinner than the last time, his eyes rimmed red like he hadn't slept in days. He sat across from Tank in the visiting room, hands folded on the metal table between them, cuffed at the wrist even here. Tomorrow, Danny said. Just that one word, like it was too heavy to build a whole sentence around. Tomorrow, Tank agreed. I keep thinking about all the ways it could go wrong, Danny said. His voice cracked. What if the judge looks at my record and that's all he sees? A guy who got in a bar fight, who tied his own nephews and niece up like criminals. What if he doesn't see anything else? He'll see what Rebecca shows him, Tank said, and what I tell him, and what the kids say themselves. That's more than just a record on paper. Danny was quiet a moment, staring down at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. You know, when you stepped in front of that car at the gas station, I thought you were just another person trying to take them from me. Another person who decided what was best for my family without knowing a thing about us. I know, Tank said. But you didn't, Danny said. You showed up, every visit, every hearing. You brought your friends to read to them. You didn't have to do any of it. He wiped his face roughly with the back of his cuffed hands. I didn't think there were people left in this world who'd fight for a family that wasn't theirs. Guess I was wrong. Tank reached across the table and gripped Danny's shoulder, steady and firm. Get some sleep if you can, Tank said. Tomorrow we fight together. The courtroom was smaller than Tank expected. Wood-paneled walls, a flag standing in the corner, rows of hard benches that reminded him of church pews. He sat in the second row, wearing the only suit jacket he owned, his leather vest folded carefully in a bag at his feet. Dutch sat beside him, along with Big Sal and 4 other chapter brothers, all of them scrubbed up and quiet, hands folded like schoolboys waiting for a scolding. Danny sat at the table up front next to Rebecca, wearing a borrowed tie that didn't quite fit right around his collar. He looked back once at Tank, and Tank gave him a nod. Steady. That was all he could offer right now. Judge Harmon was an older woman with silver hair pulled back tight and reading glasses perched on her nose. She had a voice that carried without being loud, the kind of voice that made a room go still just by starting to speak. We're here to determine custody arrangements for the Reyes children, she said, looking over her glasses at the room. Let's proceed. Rebecca stood first. She laid out Danny's story plainly. No embellishment needed. A young man who lost his sister without warning, who panicked out of love and fear rather than malice, who had spent every day since trying to prove he could give those children a home. She called it exactly what it was. This is not a case about a dangerous man, Rebecca said. This is a case about a young man who made one terrible decision out of terror and who has spent every day since correcting course. The children love him. The community has rallied around him. What this family needs now is support, not separation. Then came Ms. Patterson. Tank hadn't expected much from her. She'd always seemed careful, guarded, someone following rules stacked a mile high. But when she took the stand, her voice had a different note in it, something warmer than the last time Tank had heard her speak. In my years doing this work, she said, I don't often see children as attached to a guardian as Ellie, Jaden, and Mikey are to their uncle. Nor do I often see a support system like the one that's formed around this family. Mr. Morrison and his associates have shown up to every visit, every check-in. The children are calmer, more settled, more hopeful than I typically see in cases like this. She paused, glancing at Danny. It's my professional opinion that separating this family would cause more harm than the incident that brought us here. A murmur rustled through the room. Tank felt something in his chest loosen, just slightly. Then Rebecca called his name. Tank walked to the stand, feeling like every step weighed 100 pounds. He sat, folded his big hands in his lap, and looked at Judge Harmon. Mr. Morrison, Rebecca said, tell the court what you witnessed at the gas station that day. Tank told it plain. The fogged window, the rope, the fear in 3 sets of eyes. He didn't dress it up. And why does this case matter so much to you personally? Rebecca asked. Tank's jaw tightened. He looked past Rebecca, past Danny, straight at the judge. When I was 9 years old, he said, my parents died in a car wreck. I had a little sister, 6, a little brother, 4. The state split us up within a week, told us it was temporary. His voice caught, but he pushed through it. It wasn't. I never saw my brother again. 40 years, and I still don't know if he's alive. The room had gone completely silent. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy, Tank said. I'm telling you because I watched Danny do something desperate and wrong at that gas station. But it came from the same place my foster families never understood in me. He wasn't trying to hurt those kids. He was trying to keep them together because he knew, somewhere in his gut, what happens when nobody does. He looked at the children's empty seats reserved near the front, then back at the judge. Please don't let what happened to me happen to them. Judge Harmon's eyes were wet. She removed her glasses, set them down, and folded her hands. Thank you, Mr. Morrison, she said quietly. You may step down. She looked over the courtroom, drawing a slow breath, and reached for her papers. Given the testimony presented today, I am inclined to rule in favor of Your Honor. Opposing counsel rose sharply from his seat, papers in hand. Before you proceed, the state has just received information that bears directly on this case. We request a recess. The recess lasted 20 minutes that felt like 20 years. Tank stood out in the hallway with Dutch and Big Sal, none of them saying much. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a vending machine hummed. Tank kept his eyes on the courtroom doors, waiting. It's going to be fine, Dutch said, though his voice didn't have its usual confidence behind it. Tank didn't answer. He'd learned a long time ago not to trust things going fine. When they filed back in, Danny looked worse than before, paler. His hands, folded on the table, wouldn't stay still. Rebecca leaned over, whispering something to him, but whatever she said didn't seem to help. Judge Harmon took her seat again, and the room settled into a tense quiet. Counsel, she said, nodding to the opposing attorney. You have new information you wish to present? Yes, Your Honor. He stood, straightening his jacket, a folder in his hand, like it was evidence of something bigger than it was. A background check completed this morning revealed an arrest on Mr. Reyes's record from 8 years ago. A bar altercation in Fresno County. Mr. Reyes was charged with assault, though the charges were later dropped. A murmur ran through the courtroom again, but this one felt different. Colder. Your Honor, Rebecca said, rising fast, this is a single incident from nearly a decade ago. Charges were dropped. There's been no criminal activity since. Nothing on Mr. Reyes's record in 8 years. This has no bearing on his fitness as a guardian today. It speaks to a pattern of poor judgment under stress, the opposing counsel said. Combined with the incident at the gas station, the court has reason to question Mr. Reyes's decision-making in high-pressure situations. This is precisely the kind of information that should have been disclosed from the outset. He was 23 years old, Rebecca shot back. He got into a fight defending a friend. It has nothing to do with 3 children who love him and depend on him. Judge Harmon held up a hand, and the room quieted. I understand both arguments, she said slowly. She looked down at the folder in front of her, then back up, her face harder now than it had been just minutes before. But I have 3 children whose safety and stability are my responsibility to protect. New information, even old information, changes the calculus of caution I must apply here. Tank felt his stomach drop. Your Honor, please, Danny said, standing up before Rebecca could stop him. That was 8 years ago. I was a different person. I would never— Mr. Reyes, the judge said, not unkindly, I understand your concern, but I have an obligation to be thorough before making a permanent decision that affects these children's lives. She took a breath, glancing at her notes one final time. In an abundance of caution, I am postponing final ruling on this case, pending further evaluation. Until that time, the children will be placed in emergency foster care. She paused. Separately, given current placement availability. The words landed like a blow. Tank heard Danny make a sound, something between a gasp and a sob, but the judge was already moving on, gathering her papers, already halfway to standing. This court is adjourned. It happened fast after that. Too fast. Ms. Patterson appeared at the side door with 2 other caseworkers Tank didn't recognize, and the children were brought in from the waiting room, where they'd been kept during the hearing. Ellie's eyes found Tank immediately, wide with confusion. What's happening? She said. Where's Danny? Where's Uncle Danny? Ellie. Tank knelt down in front of her, his knees cracking against the hallway tile. Listen to me. But Ms. Patterson was already stepping between them, gentle but firm, her clipboard against her chest. Ellie, sweetheart, you're going to go with this nice lady for a little while. No. Ellie's voice cracked. No, we stay together. We're supposed to stay together. Jaden grabbed his sister's hand, and Mikey grabbed Jaden's, the 3 of them forming a chain nobody wanted to break. But the caseworkers were already moving, already pulling them apart, one small hand at a time. Tank! Mikey screamed, reaching back over the caseworker's shoulder, his small fingers stretching through the air. Tank, don't let them! Ellie was crying now, fighting against the woman's grip, twisting to look back. Please, please don't take us away from each other, please! Jaden wasn't saying anything at all. He'd gone silent, his face crumpled, tears streaming as he was carried toward a different door, a different car, a different house. Tank stood frozen in the hallway, his hands empty at his sides, watching 3 children who had trusted him more than anyone else in the world being torn apart right in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Mikey's scream cut through Tank like a blade through old leather, tearing at seams he thought had healed a long time ago. Tank! Tank, don't let them! The caseworker carrying him was gentle about it, careful even, But gentle didn't matter to a 5-year-old who understood only one thing. He was being taken from the people he loved. His small hand stretched out over the woman's shoulder, fingers grasping at empty air, reaching for Tank across a distance that grew wider with every step. Tank's boots felt bolted to the floor. He wanted to move. Every part of him screamed to move, to cross the hallway and scoop that boy up and tell the woman no, not this one, not today. But his body wouldn't listen. He stood there, a mountain of a man, and he could not make his legs carry him forward, because he knew this hallway. Not this hallway exactly, not this courthouse, not these fluorescent lights or this particular shade of institutional green paint. But he knew the feeling of it, bone deep, the way you know a scar even after the skin has closed over. 36 years ago, he had been the one reaching, the one screaming a name into air that didn't answer back. He had been 9 years old, and his brother had been 6, and his sister had been 4, and somebody with a clipboard had pulled them apart in a hallway just like this one, promising it was temporary, promising they'd see each other soon. They hadn't. Not for 30 years. Not until it was too late to get back what had been taken. "Tank, please!" Ellie's voice joined Mikey's now, high and desperate, as the woman holding her tried to steer her toward a different door, a different car. Jaden had stopped screaming altogether. That was almost worse. He'd gone quiet, his small face slack with a kind of grief too big for his body, tears sliding down without sound, like he already understood that screaming didn't change anything. Big Sal's hand landed on Tank's shoulder, heavy and steadying. "Tank." Tank didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes stayed locked on Mikey's small, reaching hand until the caseworker turned the corner and the boy disappeared from view, his cries growing fainter, swallowed by the hallway, by the building, by a system that moved children around like paperwork. Dutch said something. Tank didn't hear it. His ears were ringing, a high, thin whine that blotted out everything except the memory now flooding back, unstoppable, of his own small hands reaching for his brother's shirt as a stranger pulled them in opposite directions. His whole body was shaking. He felt it distantly, like it belonged to someone else, a tremor starting in his hands and working up through his arms, into his chest, until his breath came out ragged and uneven. "We need to sit down," Big Sal said, low, steering Tank toward a bench along the wall. "Come on, brother, sit." Tank sat. He stared at his hands, at the calluses and old scars, the same hands that had held a wrench 1,000 times, fixed 1,000 engines, and had never once been enough to stop somebody from tearing a family apart. Danny was somewhere behind them, being led away by Rebecca, his sobbing audible even through the closed door of a side room. Tank couldn't go to him. He couldn't go to anyone. He sat on that bench with his elbows on his knees and his head down, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Tank Morrison did not know what to do next. By the time he got back to the shop that night, the sun had long since gone down. He didn't turn on the lights. He walked past the workbenches, past the half-finished engine he'd been rebuilding for a customer, past the calendar on the wall with Mikey's birthday circled in red marker, a party Tank had promised to be at, promised with his whole chest, and now didn't know if he'd ever see the boy again to keep that promise. He sat down in the old chair by his desk, the one with the busted spring that dug into his lower back, and let the darkness settle over him like a blanket too heavy to push off. He'd failed them, just like the system had failed him. Maybe some things couldn't be fixed. Maybe he'd been a fool to think otherwise. The bell over the shop door jingled, but Tank didn't look up. He knew that walk. Heavy boots, a little uneven, like the man never quite trusted his knees to hold him. "You're gonna sit here in the dark and rot?" Dutch's voice cut through the shop, flipping on the overhead lights without asking. Tank squinted against the brightness. Turn those off. No. Dutch pulled a stool over, the metal legs scraping against the concrete floor, and sat down across from him, close enough that Tank couldn't pretend he wasn't there. Sal called me, told me what happened at the courthouse, figured you'd be here. Then you figured right. Now leave me be. Dutch didn't move. He was a big man, too, not quite Tank's size, but broad through the shoulders, with a salt and pepper braid down his back and forearms covered in faded ink. He'd known Tank for almost 20 years, long enough to know when to push and when to back off. Tonight, he pushed. You look like hell. Feel like it too. Good, at least that's honest. Dutch leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Now tell me what's going on in that thick skull of yours, because I know it ain't nothing. Tank stared at the calendar on the wall, at the red circle around Mikey's birthday. His jaw worked for a moment before the words came out, low and rough. I couldn't move, Dutch. That kid was screaming my name, reaching for me, and I just stood there, like a statue, like I was 9 years old again watching my own brother get carried off. Dutch was quiet a moment. He'd heard pieces of Tank's story before, the foster care years, the siblings he lost touch with, but never like this. Never so raw. You didn't fail him, Dutch said finally. Didn't I? No, you didn't. Dutch's voice hardened. You think showing up at that courthouse today was nothing? You think testifying, getting Sal to cough up legal money, sitting with those kids in that shelter every single day so they'd know somebody in this world wasn't gonna disappear on them, you think that's nothing? Tank shook his head slowly. None of it mattered. They still got split up. Today. They got split up today. Dutch leaned in closer. That ain't the end of the story, brother, unless you decide it is. Tank's hands curled into fists on his knees. What am I supposed to do? The judge made her call. Then you find out what happens next. You call that lawyer Rebecca. You ask her what comes after a call like this, because I guarantee you it ain't nothing. These things got appeals, hearings, all kinds of doors that ain't closed yet. Dutch's eyes bored into him. You think I don't know you, Tank Morrison? You think I ain't watched you rebuild engines everybody else called scrap metal? You don't quit. That ain't who you are. This is different. It ain't different. It's harder, maybe, but it ain't different. Dutch reached out and gripped Tank's shoulder, the same way Big Sal had in the hallway. But this time Tank let himself feel it, let the weight of it hold him up instead of pushing him down. Those kids need you thinking straight, not sitting in the dark feeling sorry for yourself. You want to help them or you want to give up? Pick one. Tank was silent a long time. The shop hummed with the quiet buzz of the overhead lights, the smell of oil and metal thick in the air around them, familiar and grounding in a way he hadn't noticed until now. I want to help them, he said finally, his voice cracking on the words. Then get some sleep and call that lawyer first thing tomorrow. Dutch stood, patting Tank once more on the shoulder before heading for the door. You ain't in this alone, brother. Never were. Tank didn't sleep much that night, but when the first gray light of morning came through the shop windows, he picked up his phone before he could talk himself out of it and dialed Rebecca's number. She answered on the second ring, sounding like she hadn't slept much either. Tank, I was hoping you'd call. Tell me there's still something we can do. There was a pause, papers shuffling on her end. There's a follow-up evaluation hearing scheduled in 2 weeks. It's not over, Tank. The judge left the door open, just barely. If we can address her concerns about Danny's record, show more evidence of stability, we've still got a shot at bringing those kids home together. Tell me everything, Tank said, gripping the phone so hard his knuckles went white. What do we need? Rebecca's voice steadied, like she'd been waiting for him to ask exactly that. We need to show the judge this isn't just Danny alone against the world. We need proof of a support system, something concrete. I can do concrete. I fix bikes for a living. I know. That's actually part of what I'm thinking. A pause, papers shuffling again. What if you petitioned to become a certified mentor for the kids? Not their guardian, Danny still holds that role, but an official support figure. Someone the court recognizes. It would show the judge this family has resources, that Danny won't be doing this alone in some falling-apart trailer with nobody to call. Tank sat with that a moment. The idea felt bigger than him somehow, heavier. You think they'd actually let a guy like me be that for them? I think a guy like you is exactly what they need. Rebecca's voice was firm now. But we can't just show up and say it. We need references. People who'll vouch for you, for Danny, for the whole situation, the school counselor, anyone who's seen how the kids act around you. Ms. Patterson, Tank said suddenly. The caseworker? She's changed. I saw it in her eyes at the courthouse. She didn't want to split them up any more than we did. Then we ask her, Rebecca said. Worst she can say is no. Over the next several days, Tank barely stopped moving. He drove to the elementary school and sat across from a soft-spoken counselor named Mrs. Grant, who pulled out a folder thick with notes about Ellie's improved attention in class, about Jaden smiling more at recess, about how both kids mentioned Uncle Tank more than once in their sessions. She didn't hesitate to write a letter. He called Big Sal, who rounded up half the chapter to sign statements about Tank's character, his steadiness, his years running an honest shop in the same town without so much as a parking ticket. Dutch showed up at the shop with a folder of his own, receipts from years of charity rides the club had done for local families, proof they weren't just leather and chrome, but men who showed up when it counted. And then there was Ms. Patterson. Tank almost didn't call her, felt strange, asking the woman who'd pulled the kids from that gas station lot to now stand up and say they belonged with him and Danny both. But Rebecca pushed him to try, and when he finally dialed her number, her answer came fast. No hesitation at all. I've watched those kids for weeks, she said, her voice quieter than he remembered. I've seen how they light up when you walk into a room. I'll write whatever the court needs. I should have said something sooner. By the end of the week, Rebecca had a stack of letters an inch thick, a formal petition drafted, and a plan to present Tank not as some outsider trying to horn in on a family that wasn't his, but as exactly what the judge needed to see. Proof that Danny wasn't alone. That Friday, Tank drove to the county jail, the folder of paperwork sitting on the passenger seat like something sacred. He signed in, waited in the visitation room with its scratched plastic chairs and buzzing fluorescent lights, and when Danny came shuffling in wearing his orange jumpsuit, his face had that same hollow look it always had lately, like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. Got some news? Tank said, sliding into the chair across from him. Danny sat down, slow, eyes wary. Good news or bad news? Good, I think. Rebecca's got a plan for the hearing. Tank spread out the folder between them, pointing to the letters one by one. School counselor wrote about how the kids are doing better. My chapter brothers vouched for me. Even Patterson wrote something. Danny stared at the papers like he didn't quite believe they were real. Patterson? The caseworker? Yeah. She believes in this now, Danny. All of it. Tank tapped the last document, the one about Danny's record. And we're going to deal with that bar fight head on. Show the judge it was years ago, that you've had nothing since, that you've been steady and working and doing right by these kids every day since your sister passed. Danny's throat moved as he swallowed hard. You really think this could work? I think we got a real shot, Tank said. But you gotta be ready. Judge is gonna ask you hard questions. You gotta answer honest, no flinching. Danny's hands, cuffed loosely on the table, trembled just slightly. But for the first time since the arrest, something flickered behind his tired eyes. Something that looked almost like hope. The 2 weeks before the hearing felt longer than any 2 weeks Tank had ever lived through. He got the addresses from Ms. Patterson, who didn't ask why he wanted them. She just wrote them down on a sticky note and slid it across her desk, along with a quiet nod that said more than words could. Mikey was staying with an older couple named the Hendersons, out past the highway in a small house with a swing set in the back. Tank pulled up on his bike that first Tuesday, engine rumbling low, and by the time he'd taken off his helmet, the front door was already flying open. "Uncle Tank!" Mikey came running across the yard in socked feet, no shoes, arms pumping. Tank scooped him up before he even thought about it, the boy's small body shaking with something between laughter and tears. "Hey there, buddy." Tank held him steady. "I brought you something." He'd stopped at the toy store on his way, feeling foolish standing in the aisle full of plastic action figures, but he'd found a small stuffed dog, brown and floppy-eared, and it had seemed right somehow. Mikey clutched it to his chest like it was the most precious thing he owned. "Is Ellie coming? Is Jaden coming?" Mikey asked, looking past Tank toward the empty driveway. "Not today, bud, but soon. I promise you're gonna see them soon." Mikey's face crumpled just for a second, before he buried it in the stuffed dog's fur. Mrs. Henderson, standing in the doorway, gave Tank a sad, understanding look. "He asks about them every night," she said quietly. "Cries himself to sleep some nights." Tank felt something crack open in his chest, an old and familiar ache. Jaden was staying with a foster family 2 towns over, a busy household with other kids running through the halls. Tank found him sitting alone on the back steps, kicking at the dirt, none of the noise from inside seeming to touch him. "Hey, champ." Tank sat down beside him, joints creaking against the concrete. He pulled a soccer ball from his saddlebag, the leather worn soft from Dutch's own garage collection. "Thought you might want to kick this around sometime." Jaden took it without much enthusiasm, just holding it in his lap. "Nobody here plays soccer right," he mumbled. "And Dutch isn't here to show me the card trick again." "Dutch misses you too. Talks about you at the shop." Tank bumped his shoulder gently against the boy's. "How you doing, really?" Jaden was quiet a long moment, staring at the ball. "I want to go home," he finally said. "Even though we don't got a home anymore. I just want Ellie and Mikey and Uncle Danny. I don't care where." Tank didn't have an answer good enough for that. He just put his arm around the boy's shoulders and let him lean in. Ellie was the hardest visit. She was staying with a foster family in a tidy house on the edge of town. And when Tank arrived, she was sitting stiff and formal on the living room couch, hands folded in her lap like she'd taught herself to look composed even when she wasn't. "Hey, Ellie girl." She looked up, and the composure cracked instantly. "Tank." Her voice broke on his name. He sat down across from her, careful, patient, the way he'd learned to be around her these past weeks. She wasn't like Mikey, who wore his heart wide open, or Jaden, who buried his feelings in distraction. Ellie carried hers quiet and deep, like she was afraid if she let it out, it would swallow her whole. "I keep thinking about the hearing," she said finally, twisting her fingers together. "What if the judge doesn't listen? What if they split us up for good this time?" "That's not gonna happen," Tank said, though his own chest tightened with the same fear. "You don't know that." Her eyes filled, spilling over before she could stop them. "Tank, please. Can we talk at the hearing? Can the judge hear us say it? That we want to stay together? That we want Uncle Danny? That we don't want to be split up ever again?" Tank reached over and took her small hand in both of his, steady as he could manage. I promise you, he said, voice low and sure. I'm gonna make sure that judge hears your voice, all three of you, directly this time. No more talking around you like you're not even in the room. The courtroom looked different the second time. Same wood paneling, same tired fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, same hard benches that made your back ache after 20 minutes. But something in the air had shifted. Tank felt it the moment he walked through the doors, Big Sal and Dutch flanking him like a wall of leather and quiet strength. This time the room was full. Ms. Patterson sat near the front, a thick folder in her lap. The Hendersons had come, and Jaden's foster family too, all of them squeezed onto benches meant for strangers but filled now with people who had somehow become something more. Rebecca Alvarez stood at the front table, sharp in a gray suit, her notes organized in neat stacks, her jaw set with the kind of determination Tank had come to trust. Danny sat beside her, hands folded tight, his knee bouncing under the table. He'd shaved, combed his hair, looked like a man trying hard to hold himself together for the people who needed him too. All rise. Judge Marina Ford entered, her robe swishing, her face unreadable as she took her seat. She looked older than Tank remembered from the first hearing. Or maybe he was just seeing her clearer now, understanding the weight she carried in every decision she made. We're here to revisit the matter of guardianship for Ellie, Jaden, and Michael Reyes, she said, opening a folder. Miss Alvarez, you may proceed. Rebecca rose. Thank you, Your Honor. She called the school counselor first, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Okafor, who taught at Ellie's school and had been present for several of the supervised visits. In the weeks since the children began seeing Mr. Morrison and their uncle under supervision, Mrs. Okafor said, I've observed a marked improvement in all three children. Ellie's grades have stabilized. Jaden has started raising his hand in class again, and according to his foster family, Mikey's nightmares have decreased significantly on the days following a visit. Can you elaborate on what you mean by improvement? Rebecca asked. They laugh more, Mrs. Okafor said simply. Children who are afraid don't laugh. These children are starting to feel safe again. Judge Ford made a note. Next came Ms. Patterson, and Tank watched her walk to the stand with her back straight, her folder tucked under her arm like armor. Ms. Patterson, you were the original caseworker assigned to this family, Rebecca said. What is your professional recommendation at this time? Ms. Patterson looked directly at the judge. I recommend reunification, Your Honor, under Mr. Reyes's guardianship, with Mr. Morrison and the motorcycle club formally recognized as a supervised support network. A small ripple went through the courtroom. Tank saw Danny's shoulders drop, just slightly, like a breath he'd been holding for weeks had finally found its way out. That's a significant shift from your original report, the judge said. It is, Ms. Patterson agreed. Because I've seen something in these past weeks I don't often get to see in this line of work. I've seen a family being rebuilt in real time. Sometimes the system gets it right by the book. Sometimes it gets it right by paying attention to what's right in front of us. Rebecca then moved to the matter of Danny's old arrest, laying out documents on the table with practiced precision. Your Honor, this incident occurred 6 years ago. A single-bar altercation, no injuries, charges dropped within a week. Since that time, Mr. Reyes has held steady employment, has no further record of any kind, and has demonstrated, under extraordinary stress, a fierce commitment to keeping his sister's children together. We submit that this old charge bears no relevance to his fitness as a guardian today. The judge studied the papers for a long moment, her expression giving nothing away. Then she looked up. I'd like to hear from the children. The room went still. Ellie rose first, Jaden and Mikey close behind her, the three of them walking together to stand before the bench. Ellie held Mikey's hand on one side and reached back for Jaden's on the other, the three of them a single unbroken line. Go ahead, sweetheart, the judge said gently. Tell me what you want." Ellie's chin trembled, but her voice, when it came, was steady and clear. "We want to stay together," she said. "All three of us, with Uncle Danny." She paused, swallowing hard, her eyes finding Tank in the front row. "And we want to be near Uncle Tank. He's the only one who never made a promise he didn't keep." Beside her, Mikey nodded fast, clutching his stuffed dog to his chest. "I want Uncle Tank," he said, small voice carrying clear through the silent room. Jaden squeezed his sister's hand. "Please," he said. "Please don't split us up again." The judge's eyes glistened. Somewhere behind Tank, he heard Big Sal clear his throat roughly, the sound of a man trying not to cry in a courtroom full of strangers. "The court will take a 15-minute recess," Judge Ford said, gathering her folder. "I need time to consider everything I've heard." "All rise." The room stood as she left through the side door, her robe disappearing behind dark wood. And then the courtroom exhaled all at once, 100 held breaths released into the stale air. Nobody sat back down right away. Tank stayed on his feet, his hands gripping the back of the bench in front of him so hard his knuckles went pale. 15 minutes? It sounded like nothing. It felt like forever. Danny turned around, his face white, his eyes searching for Tank's like he needed to borrow some of Tank's steadiness just to keep breathing. "What if she says no?" Danny whispered. "She won't," Tank said, though his own stomach was in knots. "You don't know that." "No," Tank admitted. "I don't." Rebecca touched Danny's arm. "She asked the children to speak. Judges don't do that unless they're already leaning somewhere. That's a good sign, Danny. That's a very good sign." But good signs weren't guarantees, and everyone in that room knew it. Ellie led her brothers back to the front bench, and the three of them sat pressed together, Mikey still clutching his stuffed dog, Jaden's knee bouncing the same nervous rhythm as Danny's had. Ellie put an arm around both of them, holding them close, her eyes fixed on the closed door where the judge had disappeared. Tank came and knelt in front of them, his big frame folding down so he was eye level with Mikey. "However this goes," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere. You hear me? Not going anywhere." Mikey nodded, small and solemn, and leaned his forehead against Tank's shoulder for just a second before straightening back up. Behind them, Big Sal shifted his weight from boot to boot, arms crossed over his chest, his jaw tight. Dutch sat perfectly still, which for Dutch was its own kind of miracle, his usual restless energy pressed down under the weight of the moment. Mrs. Okafor twisted a tissue in her hands. Ms. Patterson sat with her folder closed now, no more notes to take, nothing left to do but wait like everyone else. The minutes crawled. Tank checked the clock on the back wall more times than he could count, watching the second hand drag itself around the face, slow and merciless. He thought about all the years he'd carried the weight of his own childhood, the courtroom he barely remembered from when he was 9 years old, the moment some other judge in some other building had decided his fate and his siblings' fate without ever really seeing them, not the way this judge had looked at Ellie today. He thought about how much could hinge on one person's decision. How much had already hinged on it all those years ago and gone wrong. Please, he thought, not even sure who he was asking. Not this time. The side door opened. Every head in the room turned at once. Judge Ford walked back to her seat, unhurried, her expression still that same careful blank that gave nothing away, and Tank felt his heart slam against his ribs as she settled her robe and opened her folder. All rise. They rose. Tank's legs felt unsteady beneath him. Please be seated, the judge said, and they sat, and the silence that followed was the loudest silence Tank had ever heard in his life. Judge Ford looked out over the courtroom, her gaze moving from Danny to the children to Tank and the row of leather-clad men behind him, and something in her face softened, just slightly. Just enough. I have reviewed the reports, the testimony, and the recommendations before me, she said. It is the finding of this court that Daniel Reyes shall be granted supervised guardianship of Ellie, Jaden, and Michael Reyes, effective immediately. The air went out of the room in a single collective gasp. Furthermore, the judge continued, raising her voice slightly over the sound of Danny's breath catching, this court formally recognizes Mr. Thomas Morrison and the members of his motorcycle chapter as an official extended support network for this family to remain in place as part of the ongoing supervision arrangement. She set down her folder. This family stays together. The gavel came down. For one heartbeat, nobody moved, like the words needed time to travel from ear to heart. And then Ellie was up, pulling her brothers with her, and they were running, all three of them, straight past the little gate that separated the gallery from the front of the court, straight into Danny's arms and Tank's arms at once, a tangle of small bodies and shaking shoulders and joyful, disbelieving tears. Behind them, Big Sal was openly crying now, and Dutch was pounding his back like it was a victory lap. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Tank held on to those three kids like he'd never once considered letting go. The sun hung warm and gold over Tank's repair shop, the kind of late spring afternoon that made everything look a little softer around the edges. Rows of motorcycles lined the gravel yard like a fence made of chrome and leather, parked shoulder to shoulder, their owners standing beside them in a loose circle of laughter and noise. A banner hung crooked between two support poles, hand-painted in blue letters. Happy 6th birthday, Mikey. Danny stood at the grill, spatula in hand, a smear of barbecue sauce on his forearm, and a grin on his face that hadn't been there months ago. He flipped a burger, sending up a puff of smoke, and called over his shoulder, "Who wanted theirs well done?" "Me!" Jaden shouted, weaving between two parked bikes with a soccer ball tucked under his arm, Dutch chasing after him with mock seriousness. "You're too fast for an old man," Dutch said, breathing hard, hands on his knees. "Slow down before you give me a heart attack." Jaden just laughed and kicked the ball straight between Dutch's boots, sending him stumbling sideways into Big Sal, who caught him without even looking, still deep in conversation with Mrs. Okafor about something to do with pulled pork and paper plates. Ellie sat on the tailgate of Tank's truck, a paper crown slightly crooked on her head, watching it all with the kind of quiet contentment that still sometimes surprised her, like she wasn't quite used to it yet. Happiness? Steady, ordinary happiness. She'd learned to trust it a little more each week. Mikey ran circles around the picnic table, a stuffed dog tucked under one arm, the same one he'd carried through the courthouse hallway all those months ago, now a little more worn at the ears. He wore a paper crown, too, bigger than his head, sliding down over one eye, and he didn't care one bit. 6 whole years old, Big Sal said, crouching down to Mikey's level, holding out a small wrapped gift. "You know what that means?" Mikey shook his head, wide-eyed. "Means you're basically one of us now. Practically got your patch already." Mikey giggled and tore into the wrapping paper, revealing a small leather vest, kid-sized, with a patch stitched onto the back that read, "Little Brother." "Sal," Tank said, shaking his head, though he was smiling, "you're going to make him cry." "Good tears," Sal said, standing back up, wiping at his own eyes. "Good tears count." Tank leaned against the fence of the yard, a cold soda in his hand, watching it all unfold. The kids, the bikers, Danny, steady behind that grill, a job at Tank's shop keeping food on the table and pride back in his shoulders. Ms. Patterson had come by earlier with a gift bag and a smile, staying only a few minutes before she had another visit to get to. But she'd looked at the yard full of motorcycles and laughing kids and said quietly to Tank, "This is what it's supposed to look like." He thought about all the years before this one, The courtroom he barely remembered as a boy. The siblings he'd lost track of, scattered to different houses, different lives, never coming back together the way this family just had. He thought about how close it had all come to breaking apart the wrong way, right up until the very end. As the afternoon stretched long and the shadows grew longer across the gravel, Tank found himself kneeling by his motorcycle with Ellie beside him, a spare tire laid out on a canvas tarp between them. "Okay," he said, handing her the wrench. "Show me what you remember." Ellie took it with both hands, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she loosened the first bolt, slow and careful, exactly the way he'd shown her the week before. "Like that?" "Exactly like that." Tank nodded, watching her work, patient and proud. "You're a natural." She smiled, small and real, and kept going. Behind them, Jaden's laugh rang out across the yard as he dodged Dutch again, and Mikey came barreling past in his little leather vest, running full speed toward the circle of leather-clad men waiting with open arms. No rope on his wrists, no fear in his eyes, just a boy running home. Tank watched them go, the sun sinking gold and warm behind the shop, and thought that sometimes the people who looked the most frightening were the ones who fought hardest to hold a family together. And love, once given a chance, always found its way home. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.